That, and then in addition to the material, the other thing which kind of governs the behavior of a member is the boundary conditions, right? So for example, if you, so any structure, they will actually have different supports, be it a pinned support, be it a roller support, be it a fixed end support, or it could be springs as well. So we just kind of look at some of those and what are the different aspects of that, and then how do we actually what are the different real life examples of these kind of boundary conditions, right? So the first one that we could, and then also one more thing I would like to bring up here is like, so any support would actually induce a reaction load only in that direction, wherein it is, kind of locking or restraining a particular degree of freedom. And that's how that distress is actually developed in the support. So for example, if we look at this first one here, that's, we're actually talking about a pinned end support here, right? So what this does is like it actually locks all of the different degrees of freedom of translation in all the three directions. So that's what I'm showing here, like Rx, Ry, and Rz. So that's the reactions that this pin support would actually produce in X, Y, or the three-dimensional direction, because it kind of locks the translational degree of freedom of a member in when a member is having this kind of support. And a real life example of this support would be, say for example, if you have a, say, a steel beam to a steel column connection, which is like a typical or normal shear type connection. In that case, the kind of support that qualifies as is a pinned support, wherein that shear type connection is not really, it's kind of prohibiting like movement of that beam at that end in all the three directions, but it's still allowing rotation of that joint about that direction. So it's not really prohibiting any rotation of the member about the joint, but it's just translational degrees of freedom which are kind of restrained. So that's one example of this one here. The other is, say, a roller support, right? So in roller support, what happens is we actually just lock one degree of freedom of translation, and that is basically normal to the surface on which this support is bearing. So if you see in this diagram here, only Ry is produced. That's because Ry is basically the direction, the reaction that's produced in the vertical direction. So it kind of locks the degree of freedom in that direction only, but it can still glide easily or slide easily in the plane of paper, say east west, or maybe into the plane of paper or out of the plane of paper. And a good real life example of this kind of support would be, say, if you have an expansion joint and then you have a beam crossing an expansion joint in a structure. In that case, that beam has to be kind of seated on a roller support, which is like a bearing pot or something. And the reason for that is you don't really want to, given it's an expansion joint, so the intent of an expansion joint is to be able to not transfer any lateral loads induced in the two structures from one structure to the other. So in that case, you actually require this kind of support there, so that that beam or a member which is actually spanning across an expansion joint does not end up transferring any, say, lateral force from one structure to the other. So that's one example of a roller connection. I mean, there are a bunch of different other examples as well, like in the bridge industry as well. So that's a roller support. The other one is a fixed end condition, wherein all the six degrees of freedom, like all the three rotational degrees of freedom, and then all the three translational degrees of freedom, so they're all actually locked, and therefore that joint actually produces reactions in those corresponding directions. And this is a very common support again, which is used, say, in a moment frame system, for example, wherein if you have a beam which is connected rigidly to a column, so in that case all the six degrees of freedom are actually kind of not logged per se, but then you still develop all these six forces over there because you have that restraint internally. But then from a support condition standpoint, say if you have a beam which is moment connected to a column, for example, say if you consider RCC beam, wherein you have designed, and that's a cantilever beam, and then you have designed that beam to take care of that moment, right, which is developed as a fixed end. So that's a good example of this kind of boundary condition. So that's that. And then lastly, I would also like to kind of touch upon the internal hinges, which is not really a boundary condition per se, but then it's more like additional equation that we get when we are trying to solve all the equilibrium equations. Because in an internal hinge, what happens is that internal hinge can just transfer only shear reaction from one member across to the other, but then it can't really transfer any moment at all. And a good real life example of this would be, so in the US, what happens is, like, typically, say you have a beam, for example, which is, say, 70 to 75 feet in length. But then in that case, the thing is, the maximum shipping length of that beam or members in US may be like 40 to 60 feet, right? But then this beam, for example, let's say 75 feet in length. In that case, you can't really ship this entire piece. So in that case, what you would do is you would end up splicing that beam here. So if you have a splice connection here, that splice could be a shear type splice, or it could be a moment splice, wherein if it's a shear splice, that's more like an internal hinge, where it would just transfer shear across from one member to the other. But when it's a moment type hinge, in that case, you also make sure like there is continuity in moment as well. So like these are a few possibilities that we have in terms of achieving the different degrees of freedom and the boundary conditions in a given structure. So let's just now kind of try and cover some of the basic types of beams that we already might be aware of, but just to kind of touch upon them. So like the first one would be say a cantilever beam, which I talked about before, wherein you have a beam which is having a free end at one end, and then you have a fixed end at the other end, right? So that's what I've denoted here. Like we have a fixed end on the side, for example, and then a free end over here. So that means when we say free, that means that joint is actually have has no degree of freedom which is locked. But then when it's a fixed condition, that means all the 6 degrees of freedom are actually locked. So that means whatever load is applied on this beam, on this cantilever beam, so this moment reactions here will actually try and equilibrate those forces. So this joint here could develop the translational reactions as well as rotational reactions. So that's what this beam is, and this is really a common kind of a beam, for example, which is seen, say, even in canopies. So canopies would be one good example where you would see a bunch of cantilevers, and the other would be, say, in residential projects, you would see balconies which are kind of cantilever off of floors. So in that case, though, beams which actually pick up those balcony floors and all, they're actually cantilevers. So that's one good example of a real life cantilever structure. The second would be, say, if you have a simply supported beam, which is like the most basic one, wherein you have one end which is pin support and the other is kind of a roller support, right? So this is a very basic single span beam condition. And like the thing is, this is wherein whatever load you apply, there's no moment reactions developed on either side. It's just the translational ones. So whatever loads you apply, based on that, the reaction is actually produced in these beams at the corresponding joints. So if you apply a vertical load, you will see that vertical reaction is developed on this joint as well as this joint. But if you apply, say, an axial load, in that case, as we know, like since this can easily glide over, so there's no horizontal reaction developed here. So the entire axial load that you apply in this beam would actually be taken by this support here, because this support is actually capable of making sure that there's no translation along that degree of freedom. Good example of this kind of beam would be, say, if you consider a composite beam structure, right, wherein most of the beams are actually considered as simply supported to get the composite action, which is not really in the scope of this seminar, but then just wanted to let you know like what are the different real life examples of these kind of boundary conditions. The third one would be, say, a beam which is kind of running over supports. So that running over of the support is basically known as an overhang. So this one is, say, an overhang, this one here is an overhang, and this could be on one side as well or both sides of the structure as well. And then this kind of happens when, say, you have a beam and then you have a column here. So this support is basically a column, but then the column can't really go all the way to the face of the building. So in that case, you have to stop short the column right before the face of the building. But then since you have flooring over here which is supported, so this beam actually has to extend over so that it can pick up the floor edge over there and the facade and things like that, which is going to be existing over here. So that's one good example of where you would actually come up with these kind of beams. And then even at roof, wherein when you have a column in the intermediate location, but then you need to pick up the facade which is kind of hanging off of the roof. So in that case, you'll have to come up with this kind of a beam. That's one example. And then there's this example wherein it's a propped condition or a propped cantilever where one end is fixed. So that means this end is actually able to pick up all of the translational degree of freedom reactions. But then over here, it's just a roller support. So one good example of this would be, say, if you have a concrete beam which is, say, supported off of a wall about its minor axis. So say if it's a shear wall, but then this wall is, or this beam is kind of supported off of the minor axis of the walls. So we typically don't design these walls for any minor axis moment. So in that case, that joint here does not really have much rotational fixity, so it's more like a pinned support here, or a roller support rather, for that matter. But then over here, if you have a pretty stiff column and then you have this beam framing into that column, in that case you can definitely develop that fixity over there. So that's one example of fixed support and the roller support. So this is known as a propped cantilever beam. And then say this beam here, for example, say it's a single span beam. So this is a good example of what I was talking about when we said that splicing condition, right? So if it was a pinned beam in that case, and then you provide internal hinge where to say, so if, for example, if it was, a simply supported beam, and then that was say pretty long and you can't really ship that, so you end up providing a splice connection here. So if it's a shear splice, that means there's no moment that's going to be transferred. And if this was a pin support and this was a roller support, in that case, obviously this structure will become unstable, right? So in that case, to avoid that, what we are doing here is, like, say you introduce a shear type internal hinge here, and then you have a fixed end here, so that this becomes a stable structure now. So this is one good example wherein you have a beam which is spliced with a shear connection. In that case, you can actually have this kind of boundary condition here as well, where you have a fixity on one support, say it's a column, and then you have a shear splice connection here, and then you have this another connection to another girder or a column, which is like a pinned condition. So basically, it's up to us, like what kind of support conditions we want to have the structure, so that it's kind of stable. So like as of now, we have just looked at some of the single span conditions. We can actually take a look at some multiple span conditions as well, which is actually very common in RCC structures. I mean, for example, it could be more than a single span, say it's a two span or maybe three span or five span beam, which is continuous over the support. So I mean, whenever we load any structure, there's going to be these additional supports that we have, and therefore they will develop their own reactions, and then there'll be, because of the continuity over the beam, or over the support rather, there'll be a development of kind of a negative moment for gravity loads and all. So this is actually a very common thing in the residential projects as well, wherein you have multiple span beams, or it could be, say, a parking structure as well, where you have multiple span post tension structures as well. So I wanted to touch upon, I mean, so we actually have these different boundary conditions which we can ensure while we are designing and detailing the connections. So this was it in terms of just coming up with different types of beams that we work with in our field. And then now this is something which is very basic again. So say when you have a beam which is I've shown in red, and then if and that is a neutral axis, right? And I guess most of us would be aware of what a neutral axis is, right? That's the line along depth wherein where there's no deformation in the or there's no strain at all in the beam. So the thing is, whenever a beam is kind of loaded, it obviously has to bend, and therefore whatever load is applied, so there's some work done by the load, and then that is actually stored in the structure as strain energy is what we call. So what I'm trying to show here is, like, when you apply a load, the beam actually deflects, and the deflected shape is, say, shown in green here. So the vertical displacement that we typically deal with, y, is actually the vertical displacement of the neutral axis, for example. And then if now the thing is, we have these different loading or different beam equations that we have, which is kind of the basic of any beam analysis, right? So if you have a beam which is subjected to a uniform load, or maybe not a uniform load, but say it's a load which is a function of the space. So say that load is wx. So we have these different conditions here, which says the force differential of the vertical deflection curve with respect to the space, that's actually equal to the loading intensity of on this beam over ei, where e is the modulus of elasticity of the beam and I is the moment of inertia. So that's a very basic one. And then if you integrate it once with respect to x, you get the third differential of for the vertical displacement over x, and that basically gives us nothing but the shear force variation or shear force at a given section in a beam. And then if you integrate it further, so you reach the second derivative of y, which is d2y by dx2, which is also known as the curvature of the beam, and that's actually equal to the bending moment over ei. And then lastly, dy dx, which is actually the slope of the beam at any given section. So that is actually theta. So these are the few equations which kind of govern or the differential equations which kind of govern the behavior or response of a beam. And then based on this, and then also, like, since we have a differential equation to solve this beam, we also need to have a set of boundary conditions, right, to solve this differential equation. And that's where the support conditions actually come into picture, because that's where it kind of gives us, okay, so for example, say if you have a pinned support or a roller support, in that case, as I said, like at the supports, since you don't have any rotational degree of freedom logged, in that case the moment over there would be kind of zero. So that's the reason the second derivative of the deflection with respect to x would be zero. Say the vertical deflection at that point is also zero, right? Because that's a support, that's a vertical translation logged kind of a support. So over there, y would be zero, which is your vertical displacement. And then we have this equation here, which is also very important, and that's going to come in very handy when you're reviewing the bending moment and shear force diagram, which is that the slope of the bending moment diagram actually gives the shear force, and that's what we saw in the previous slide as well, right? Because the third derivative was actually the shear force, and the second derivative was the bending moment. So this is also a very important equation that we kind of try and come up with when we deal with the different bending moment and shear force diagrams. So these are some of the very basic equations that we typically need to be aware of for any structure. I mean, even though we are saying it's for beam, but this actually applies to even columns as well, where if a column is seeing any flexure, in that case these apply to the columns as well. All right. So now the thing is, like, typically now there are these different sign conventions that people actually use. So the most common would be, so we have actually these bending moments and then shear force, right? So we have to choose actually some sign convention to make sure, okay, we are able to kind of distinguish between a positive response and a negative response. So typically what happens is, say if you have a beam which is subjected to a moment such that it produces tension at top, tension at bottom and compression at top due to flexing of the beam. So that's considered like a positive bending moment in the beam. And then say if you consider the shear force, in that case, if there's a beam section, say elemental length considered dx. So in that case, if you have, say, a left up right down type of shear force, and that's being kind of realized in the beam, so that's more like a positive shear force. So that's kind of the sign convention that typically is used. And but this could actually vary from software to software and things like that, but then we can always set it based on whatever we want to. So that was more of a sign convention that's typically used. Now there's this also thing which is more of a real life thing, that's basically flexible supports. So till now what we are seeing is beams having those support reactions which are locking the translational or the rotational degree of freedom. But then in reality, nothing is actually having infinite stiffness, be it in terms of rotation or be it in terms of translation. So in that case, what actually happens is, if you consider this beam here, that's basically, say, supported off of two springs, two vertical springs here, which is, so one is having a stiffness of K1 in a load per unit deformation, and then this one is having say a spring stiffness of K2, a vertical stiffness, and then we have this rotational spring which is K3. So what all of these K1, K2, K3 mean is, K1 means, like, if you apply unit deformation, unit translational deformation rather, in this spring, it would produce a force of K1. Similarly, here, if you apply a translational deformation in the spring, you would come up with a force of K2. And then here, if you apply a unit rotation in this spring, you would develop a moment reaction here, which is K3. So that's what these different spring stiffnesses mean. And the thing is, this is actually really important, because in real life structures, as I said, like, nothing is fully fixed or fully pinned. So, for example, if you consider, say, a moment frame wherein columns are actually supported off of foundations, we all know, like, foundations actually settle, right, due to gravity loads and all, because the soil settle. Because of that, the foundations also settle. So in reality, they are not really pinned supports, but they are more of a spring support. So there are structures wherein those settlements may be like kind of negligible or may not have a huge impact on the structural behavior. But then there would be structures wherein, if these settlements are kind of high, in that case, that's going to have a drastic impact on the structures itself. So in that case, it's kind of important to understand, like, what kind of structure we are dealing with, and also what are the stiffnesses of those supports that we have. And then the other example of this would be, say, if you have a grade beam which is spanning from one foundation to the other and then to the other. So if it's a continuous beam, for example, in that case, if any support settles, in that case, we know that actually changes the bending moment and shear force diagram of the beam itself. So it's really important for some of the structures to just make sure, like, we understand, like, what are different implications of considering a support settlement or a flexible support versus a pinned support. So things like that. And then now the different types of load that we typically encounter in a real life project. So just wanted to, like, cover some of those aspects. So for example, gravity, that means that's actually acting vertically downwards in the gravity direction. So obviously the weight of the members would be the basic one that qualifies for that category. And then we have the weight of the floor finishes, like whatever tiles or, say, concreting that you are doing on top of the floor to have a floor finish. So that also has its own weight. So that's also kind of a gravity load. And then we have the facade weight. So say if you have a curtain wall or a metal panel system, so they have their own weight. So when there are like gravity load which is applied on the structure, then we have live load, say moving load, right? I mean, people walking over a floor, so the people actually inducing their own weight as well. So that's also gravity load on the structure. Then we have the partition wall loads. I mean, when you're moving partitions here and there, I mean, that's a gravity load because they have their own weight. And then we also have, say, a snow load or rain load, right? I mean, if you go to the North India, wherein there's a bunch of snowfall that happens, so they also have their own weight, and they also impose those loads to the structure if the snow gets accumulated on the structure, and then rain as well. So since we don't want to we tend to avoid having rain loads, so that's the reason like all of our roof actually has those slopes, and also that the rainwater could drain into those things. So, and then we have these lateral loads as well. So first of all, say if you have a retaining wall which is retaining pressure from the earth, so that's like a earth's pressure that we typically use, and then fluid hydrostatic pressure. So if you have a groundwater table, so even that induces a horizontal pressure on the wall itself. So that's again another type of load which we typically consider, which is lateral load. And then we have these hybrid loads here. So by hybrid, I mean like they actually have a mix of gravity as well as lateral in the direction. So lateral load is something which is actually, say, acting horizontally, and then the gravity load is something which is acting vertically when you're looking at the elevation of a building. And then hybrid is something which can induce the load in both the direction, right? So for example, if you consider a blast force, if there's a blast in a building or near a building, in that case, that could induce both lateral load as well as vertical load. And then obviously we have wind loads and then seismic loads. So wind load is also considered in hybrid thing, because typically we consider wind as lateral, but then if you consider any sloped building or a sloped roof, in that case wind actually induces some uplift on the roof and downward load on the roof as well. So that's the reason this is considered as hybrid. And similarly seismic load as well, because when the ground shakes, it's not always the thing is like it always shakes horizontally, it also shakes vertically as well. So these are the different types of load that we typically deal with.